The Military Peace Movement's Challenge to Pro-Iraq War Frames, published in Social Problems, won the American Sociological Association's Peace, War, and Social Conflict Outstanding Article Award in 2011. So following Lisa, we'll have remarks by Jose Vasquez, who is the former executive director of the Iraq Veterans Against the War. He co-founded the New York City chapter of IVAW, serving as its president, and has helped organize numerous actions and events, including the Veterans and Survivors March to New Orleans, Operation First Casualty in New York City, and Winter Soldier, Iraq and Afghanistan. He assisted in editing the volume Winter Soldier, Iraq and Afghanistan, Eyewitness Accounts of the Occupation, published in 2008 from Haymarket. So first we'll start with remarks from Lisa.
Unfortunately, my book's not here, but I wanted to at least show you the cover. It's one of my favorite parts about the book was the cover. And these are activists at the DNC convention in 2008, I do believe. There's a couple of things that I wanted to make remarks about just at the start. This book you can easily find on all bookstore or from any bookstore and online for about less than $25. But more than that, when I'm here, I'm back in my dual role that is less comfortable for me than my academic space these days. And Mishi gave me a wonderful introduction, closer to my academic introduction. And yeah, I'm chair of peace studies. I've been a sociologist now for longer than I probably want to say out loud, because some of you think I'm much younger, which I'm going to go with. But I think there's a piece of my story that many of you don't know. A lot of you think of me as an academic, which is great. But I'm also the spouse of someone who has served in the U.S. military almost 20 years. He was an Army reservist. That's how he paid for college. And prior to September 11th, he applied to the Navy to be a pilot and was accepted right after September 11th. His startup date was in the fall of 2003. And he was an F-18 pilot who flew 3 missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, or I shouldn't say 3 missions, good Lord. He served 3 deployments off the USS Nimitz, flying missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. And he had a 4th deployment in Bahrain. So that's my other connection to this as well. So when doing this work, it's both a personal sort of labor of love, and I come at this as both an academic and an activist. And this book is about one of the pieces of the story that I think has been missing from a great deal of this conference, at least as a piece to analyze, and that's families. And so this book is about the interactions between veterans and military families in the anti-war movement. A number of you are families, though. You have had children in the military as well, or you've also had parents. And so listening to many of you talk, that is also a lens through which you see these kinds of activities as well. And I think I just wanted to highlight that too. So 2 things I'm going to be focused on, and then I'm going to have some sort of conclusion remarks. And they come from my book. One is the strategic importance of veterans and military families, and the second being storytelling as both therapy and activism. And I've seen these 2 threads throughout the conference, and so I thought they were good conclusionary remarks, as well as, hey, things I pointed out in my book, so, forgive me. I refer to the coalition of these 4 organizations whose logo, their earlier and earliest logos are up on the screen, as the military peace movement. And I also would include other related organizations, including VVAW, Gold Star Families Speak Out, and there's a handful of others, and unaffiliated individuals, people who intentionally chose not to join those organizations. And my ethnographic work began really in 2002, but began in earnest in 2005 through 2009. Those were the main years of my ethnography. I logged over 900 hours in the field. At some point at 900, I just stopped counting, going to all kinds of speeches, marches, et cetera. And then I also conducted 30 extensive semi-structured interviews. And then really by the end, about 75 plus informal interviews with others as well. And I also gathered, I have an archive that someday I will give away, but right now it's sitting in my office taking up like 3 giant, what are these things called? Filing cabinets that people keep saying, why do you need filing cabinets? This is the electronic age. And I'm like, don't you touch those. Don't you touch them. Anyways, so one of the key pieces that I've been seeing throughout people's talks and that I saw in studying this movement that I think the veterans and military families can use to make a difference is strategically and intentionally talking about one's identity as a veteran. I have one of the quotes up there about some of the memorials that were put on, many of which were called Arlington West, but there were also different forms of them put on by the American Friends Service Committee and other groups, including Vets for Peace, that would use either symbols of different types of cemetery-type symbols or boots or other kinds of insignia to demonstrate the military connections, and would, in that visual, bring people to the table to talk about issues no matter where they stood, because people would see that kind of display and they weren't always sure, is this pro-war, anti-war, neutral, and it allowed you to engage with other individuals. And when people heard that it was a peace organization, but a veterans peace organization or a military families, it made a whole huge difference. And this was just one of the quotes from a Vietnam veteran, combat veteran, that I spoke with on that. And in addition to being able to talk about how the veterans perceived what people thought about those kinds of activities, I, in all my observations, also really paid attention to how the audience or how people who weren't affiliated with the military or with these peace organizations interacted. And it worked. And so I really want to, as we're wrapping up here, continue to think about the importance of that strategic deployment of identity, or intentionally talking about one's identity. And this is something that Colonel Ann Wright, which many of you probably know, who's spoken with Vets for Peace, as well as many of our other organizations numerous times, that she would talk about that was something that she learned how to speak as a veteran, that she didn't always think of herself as that first. Sometimes, for example, I talk about myself as an academic, but that isn't always the most important identity for people to understand. So that's a piece of this. And why it's important, in this current moment, we see extraordinary military displays throughout our lives. And I make a joke out of this, but for goodness sake, you can't go to a goddamn baseball game without having to stand up and cheer for some petty officer first class who may or may not have done anything yet. But we're asked to give this kind of patriotic support in a very nationalistic or militaristic way in so many places now. And it's spread throughout our campuses as well as our everyday lives. And that lens of troop support, that idea that Americans have at least given, and I would say lip service, that we should be supporting the troops, is something that we can really kind of grab hold of and say, okay, well, what is troop support? How do we define that? And MFSO, VFP, IVAW, which is now About Face, and I have to stop saying IVAW, and other organizations, did a good job of saying troop support is questioning wars and wondering, is it a good idea to use troops in these kinds of way, as well as taking care of them when they get home? And so redefining that, not shying away from that language, though. We have to sort of think about how do we grab it but twist it, which is a very common thing in social movements, to reframe ideas. And so I use these images here to just illuminate a couple of ways in which the different veterans organizations have done this. And so we have IVAW doing Operation First Casualty, which is where they would show different communities, or at least intend to show different communities, what does a military operation look like. We have a population right now that's very disconnected from our wars. So trying to do different types of visual activities so that people understand it is important. But also, as much as many of us might hate it, wearing the military paraphernalia in order to identify oneself as a veteran or as a military family member can be an important part of redefining troop support, because you have to first claim it. I am a veteran, and I want you to know it in order to redefine it. So that's a piece of this. And along with that is reclaiming and redefining patriotism. This was one of the ways in which VFP over the years has used the Constitution as not something where we're saying we're not questioning everything about the United States. We're grasping on to some of the things that, those Tea Party folks or even some of the others are saying, we want the Constitution. We want to talk about all these dead white guys, quite frankly. You can say, okay, we're going to grab it too, but we're going to use those pieces of it so that you understand that the Constitution is what our troops have in fact, have a dedication to, not to that man in the White House, as Michael McPherson was talking about. And I think that's another useful way to sort of say, we can remove patriotism from this extreme nationalistic and militaristic point of view. And there's some of my friends from Santa Barbara, which is where I did my dissertation, up there with one of my favorite signs. This wasn't that they didn't understand what Jerry Lemke has to say, that that they weren't saying that when we came home from Vietnam, people were treating us poorly, but they took that narrative and at least helped to craft the signs so that people could understand what they had to say. Question our leadership, not our soldiers. Believe me, they had some deep critiques in the same way that Jerry did, but they thought this is something people understand. And it's a critique that we still get. I'm sure that Mr. Smith and others who've spoken out have had those kinds of, quite frankly, nasty Twitter comments, the right-wing pundits who go after us. I know that the last time I was on CNN, which is 6 years ago now, a while ago, I had all of those ugly comments. People didn't say they wanted to shoot me, but they did say my husband should divorce me, that I should be ashamed, all of those kinds of ways in which you get attacked these days. So we've got to address it and head on to understand that that's in the public narrative. A last thing, part of why we need to claim that identity and use it as activists is that there's an emotional appeal that we can really offer to the public, that we can, by telling our stories and by explaining what war is like, either as family members or as veterans, it is a way not only to encourage people to be angry, but to use a whole range of human emotions, to awaken empathy, to encourage grief. And we really need to draw on the range of human emotions in order to be able to craft a movement that speaks to a wide audience. And so this is a piece of it. And some of these grief-related tactics are some of the ones I thought were some of the most effective, at least in terms of the audience being brought into the peace movement. Another piece of this that I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, because we've seen it throughout the conference, that we have to really manage how we do this work. And that's, changing the world is not easy. We've seen the pain on display as people have talked in the comments as well as in their presentations. And so as activists, we have to work at, building that family amongst ourselves. That doesn't mean, right, families are ugly sometimes. Sometimes we argue. Sometimes we're, generally not always the most functional. But at the same time, that family narrative is what we all need, because again and again, activists were being shunned from their former communities, either from their former military communities or from their former families or other kinds of things. So finding ways to support each other was important. And we have to take these negative emotions and find ways through the movement to shift them into these, what I call emotions of resistance. We can't make a difference if we're just stuck in the stages of guilt and fear and shame. And anger, if it's directed at ourselves or each other, is not going to get us anywhere. We have to focus that righteous anger on the state. So that's a piece of it. So just to wrap up, what we need to do now, we have to keep telling our stories again and again. You've already heard this from other people, so I don't want to reiterate that too much. But the experiential authority that I think that veterans and military families have in this moment is so critically important because of the civil-military gap that we have right now. Civilians don't have the same experience. They don't have the same fears and emotions that many of us are experiencing. And so we need to get these stories out, and they need to be told again and again. And we need to amplify them. And we have to work on that important creative and supportive environment. And we do so in social movements and learning. I'm a social movement scholar. David Meyer was on my dissertation committee, so you're going to have to forgive me if some of these things are actually similar, because guess what? He trained me. Fun. We have to have some fun. We need to have rituals of support. We need to don't shy away from those hugs, man. It's a good thing. And I know in first seeing many of you, my first reaction was hugging and other kinds of just, sort of warmth. And then there is a great deal of literature now on empowerment and how we can encourage people to find their voices and to do it in a way that's productive. And so thinking about that as well. And you've already heard this, so I'm actually not going to spend a ton of time on it because I'm almost done. We have to work on rebuilding our coalitions. We've seen those coalitions, whether we talk about the abolitionist movement or we're talking about civil rights. At different moments, those movements spawned other forms of activism, and we need to continue to do that today, because it's not true that our young people aren't active. They're just not active on peace-related issues. As chair of peace studies, I have to remind people that peace is fundamentally tied up with justice. So any of the justice-related issues are tied into our struggle. So we have to work together, and that means sometimes we have to sit back and listen, which isn't always the easiest. And I think we struggle with that as a movement. So later I'll be happy to take questions, and those were some of my favorite little army men to leave behind at Congress people's homes. So anyways, I'll be happy to take questions later. And
That was great, Lisa. Thank you. So again, I'm Jose Vasquez. For those of you that did not attend the IVAW and New Movements panel and discussion, I just want to say a little bit about my service since it's not in my bio. So I was an economic draftee in 1991 is when I signed up. I was still in high school, a junior, and it was an interesting year to sign up because that was the same time as the Gulf War. And then in 92, the Rodney King riots happened in my senior year of high school. So in a lot of ways, my reasons for joining the military was to get away from a lot of that. So I was in active duty from 92 to 96, and then a reservist from '07 to 2007, and I left as a conscientious objector. I was also living in New York when 9/11 happened. I was on my way to an archaeology class that morning. Yeah, it was, like everyone else, life-changing, but as a service member, I had a particular relationship to that. So I remember that morning on September 11th, I called my mom in California, and then I called my partner, who became my wife, and then I called my unit and asked them where you want us to be. Are we getting mobilized? I was in a combat support hospital at the time, so I figured maybe we would go down Lower Manhattan. There's lots of hospitals in Manhattan, so I don't understand why I thought that would be necessary, but just to give you a sense of my thinking at the time. And really if I have to point at one thing for why I became a CO is the Abu Ghraib scandal. When I saw those pictures, at that point I was in grad school, and I think everything about those images kind of confirmed the fears that I had, and sort of watching the war from a distance, being an Army reservist and facing possible deployment. I think I really had a huge transformation, change of heart about why I was in the military, and it was the first time that I ever felt like putting on the uniform might not necessarily make me the good guy in the story, right? That seeing those images really resonated deeply with me, and particularly one image where a soldier is holding a German Shepherd to a detainee whose hands are tied behind his back, and that just encapsulated so many things for me. The German Shepherd tied to World War II for me, in my mind, and also, the use of dogs during the Civil Rights Movement, I think was another kind of image. And so even though I wasn't very politically conscious or politically active, I hadn't voted at that point in my life, which I'm ashamed to say, it really just kind of hit home that I have to do something about this. I have to learn more about why we're in this crazy war in the first place. And then once I started digging, I realized I don't want to be part of this institution anymore. I can't in good conscience, even as a medic, go overseas and contribute to this whole thing. The other thing is, since he's in the room, I will acknowledge Camilo Mejia. So as I was going through that process, is when Camilo was coming out of prison. So then having him speak out, finding somebody else that I could resonate with, and the fact that we're both Latino and we were both staff sergeants and we were both in the military for about the same time, it just really made it clear to me that I have to do something. I have to speak up, and come what may, I'm not going to deploy to this war. So thankfully, I was honorably discharged. I did it all by the book, and followed the regulations. It took about 2.5 years to get a determination on my case, but in the meantime, I met members of Iraq Vets Against the War and really kind of hit the ground running. The other thing the bio doesn't do is tell you what I've been up to since I left as executive director, which was all the way back in 2012. So I haven't been home, twiddling my thumbs. So some of you might know Perry O'Brien, who is also a member of Iraq Vets Against the War. So he and I had a conversation back when Winter Soldier was taking place. And one thing that we realized was somebody needs to start a training program for vets, for progressive vets that want to get involved in organizing. And that we intuitively understood that the work we were doing in IVW was hugely important, but that we also needed an inside game, that we needed a voice on the inside to bring our values and our policy positions, and also run candidates that represent those values. So we talked about starting something back then, and then promptly went in different directions. Perry took a job as an organizing director for an SEIU local. I took the job as ED at IVAW. And then Jonathan Smucker, who is another colleague of ours and was also very involved with Winter Soldier, went off to grad school. So it wasn't until 2015 that we kind of got back together. We all found ourselves back in New York City and decided we wanted to start this thing called the Veterans Organizing Institute. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm the program director, or the training director for that. And it's a program of an organization called Beyond the Choir. Beyond the Choir is the thinking there is we're trying to help organizations speak to people beyond the choir. And so a big part of what we do is try to teach vets about narrative strategy and the importance of understanding the components of an effective strategy when you're doing movement work and a political narrative that is going to resonate with a broader audience. Jonathan wrote a book called Hegemony How To, a Roadmap for Radicals, which kind of lays out some of our thinking on our approach in the Veterans Organizing Institute. And we've grown. So it's been really amazing to see the kind of hunger, I think, out there for vets that want to get trained, maybe are already doing organizing work, but are sort of like stumbling through it a little bit. And honestly, some of them don't even identify as vets, right? So we're drawing in vets from LGBTQ, organizations and movements, Black Lives Matter, environmental justice, a lot of different places, not, I think Perry and I are very comfortable in the peace and anti-war scene, right? But there's all these other vets that are out there and maybe don't even talk about the fact that they're vets, and we try and help them reclaim that and sort of use that cultural capital, that moral authority that they have as vets to sort of bring that to the movements that they're engaged in. So that's just an update on what I've been up to. I was asked to speak on some of the takeaways. I think this has been a really great conference. I want to thank David and his staff and folks that you work with to pull this together. When I looked at the list of names and sitting in the panels, it's just like, oh yeah, I've got that person's book on my shelf, and it's just like all these people that I knew names but didn't have faces to go with it. So it's really great, and I hope this is not the last one. So. One of the takeaways, if you look around the room and see all the gray hair, is that we've got a very intergenerational veterans kind of family here, right? I think that's really important. I said in the panel earlier that the relationship between VVAW, Vets for Peace, and IVAW, which is now About Face, was very much one of mentorship, right? That we were a bunch of angry combat vets coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. We didn't know anything about organizing, at least most of us didn't. I certainly didn't. And understanding the importance of building coalition and kind of, taking care of yourself, I think is another thing that we learned intergenerationally. The number of times that I had a Vietnam vet come up to me and say, listen, you gotta make sure you don't burn yourself out, right? You can easily dive into this kind of work and spin your wheels and get frustrated and sort of fade away. So I think the importance of that can't be understated. And I think now I am already feeling a bit of distance from people that are just now coming home from Afghanistan and other places around the world. So even my own experience, you might see me as young, but I'm seeing these other folks coming back from the war, and I'm like, I can't even speak authoritatively on what it's like to be in the military anymore. I got out in 2007. So I think that we want to maintain that sort of intergenerational ethos, right? And the sort of brother and sisterhood that we have as vets and military families, and sort of keep that going and strengthen it, nurture it. The other theme that really struck me was particularly listening to the two Richards talk about VVAW, is that the conditions of the Vietnam era and the war that was happening, and the unpopularity of that war, and the conditions of the Iraq war. I think that there's something we need to continue to research deeply into, that relationship of conditions and consciousness. Like, how do the conditions then lead to this, radicalization of active duty personnel and veterans and military families? Study it, understand it, replicate the best practices of those moments, because I think it's hugely important. And unfortunately, there's going to be a next war, right? The way that this administration is approaching things, and I would say even the Obama administration, war is our business, and business is doing great. So I think that we have to, as people that care deeply about peace and social justice, begin to think about what can we do to catalyze some of that consciousness that is necessary to sort of make the change that we want to see. Telling our stories, I'm going to repeat that one too, because I think it's really important, and it has a lot to do with, reaching outside of our silos, right? And I feel like a lot of people have tried to speak to Nathan's point about people are apathetic. I think that there's definitely something to that. I think that it's complicated in terms of why folks don't get involved in certain movements, but then there are a lot of organizers that are not necessarily working on peace issues, but understand deeply how militarization impacts their issue, right? So if you're talking about police accountability and the militarization of police, if you come in as a peace activist and think that black communities or brown communities don't understand what militarization looks like, a lot of people are living in occupied cities right now, right? And so it's clear. In the immigration movement, right? Folks that have families that have crossed over the border, the militarization of that space, and the fact that now the Trump administration wants to house unaccompanied minors on military bases, right? That's when we talk about opportunities, right? That is a huge opportunity to connect peace and anti-war, anti-militarism with the issue of immigration, right? It's like served to us on a platter, right? So it's really, if we don't take that opportunity, we're not paying attention, right? That immigration, DACA, all of that stuff is now being directly linked for us by keeping their children on military bases. So let's exploit that. Let's organize around that. Let's think about how we can be effective in that arena. And I think this is a lesson that it took me a long time to learn, sort of the difference between mobilizing and organizing. Organizing is a different animal. It's one thing to, and I don't want to minimize what it takes to mobilize folks, because it's a shitload of work, right? And it's important and it's visible. And sometimes for those folks that we might accuse of not paying attention, that might be the only thing they see is the mobilizations, right? Because they don't understand that there's all this other work happening in the background, the organizing, the deep organizing of identifying people and their issues, developing leaders, training, strategy, all of the fucking conference calls that we have to be on all the time. I'm not bitter. But there's a lot. There's a lot of meetings about meetings. So, but I think that if we're going to have the impact that we want to see, we've got to invest in organizing, right? We have to invest in training of cadre who are going to develop even more leaders, right? If our orientation is not toward growth, we're doing something wrong, right? If we're okay with our, weekly vigil on the corner where it's the same 10 people, I have to urge us to think about not only that tactic, but the fact that we're okay with it only being the 10 of us being at the vigil, right?
Here, here.
We have to think about, thank you. And there's a tremendous amount of dedication that it takes to show up at a vigil, rain or shine, right? But I think that if you're not looking at how to reach more and more people in your community, right? And start at home, right? Don't, often the peace movement is criticized for you care more about people in those other countries than you do about the folks here. I don't think that that's necessarily always the case, but I think that we have to look, in our immediate vicinity for the issues that we should try to connect the question of peace. And I think a lot of us have the knowledge about where all of our tax dollars are going, right? We're, as a nation, fighting over the crumbs to then fund education and healthcare and housing and, employment programs. Meanwhile, we're bleeding out in terms of where our tax dollars are going. And I think that that's probably the strongest thing that we as a peace movement have to bring to the table. Look at where your tax dollars are going. And even 5% of the defense budget moving into those other pieces of the pie is a huge shift in things, right? So I'm not saying we settle for 5%, but just when you start looking at the raw numbers, right, it's clear that it's not about scarcity for us in the United States. There's no reason why we can't have universal health care. There's no reason why we can't have free education for our people, because we have the resources. The problem is we have, or maybe not we, but the people that are in charge, right, and the people that are being bought by the lobbyists have, over the years, eroded the commitment to social programs and social goods, and then just keep funneling resources into war and the perpetuation of it. So I don't have to tell you all that, but I think that that's the message we need to take out to our allies and our comrades. So I talked about the Veterans Organizing Institute. We train vets on doing narrative strategy, understanding the kind of mechanics of that and how to deconstruct narratives. So we look at both progressive and conservative examples, right? So we play Trump campaign videos, and really, it's kind of like people's stomachs turn when they sit there and have to watch them. But what we try to do is get them to understand, look at what they're doing. Look at the faces, how they try and represent, different communities in terms of diversity. Gotcha. And then how can we do that in a more effective way, right? How can we create content? How can we create messaging that is going to resonate with a broader audience and sort of speak to people's issues? The other thing is, again, understanding that veterans, at least in the American context and probably in a lot of other places around the world and historically, veterans, warriors are the quintessential protagonists of any story, right? It's the symbolic weight that they hold in people's minds is so important and so strategic that we have to think about. We can't just cede that to the right? That in this country, patriotism and service and all of those things have sort of been co-opted by the right. We need to take that back. We need to take that back, and we need to use this veteran identity to advance progressive social change and social values. And I really like the idea of strategic deployment of identity, Lisa. I think that's great. Also, Michael, you talked about full spectrum solidarity. I think that's right on. I think that that's something we need to continue to cultivate. The last thing I'll leave you with is, who among you is going to host the next conference like this, right? We can't only leave it up to David to do the next one. So a lot of you I know are professors and have tenure and access, hopefully, to some resources. I don't want it to stop. I don't want it to be another 10 years before all of us convene. I think we should double the size of it next time and bring in more young folks and even invite folks that may not, that peace and anti-war might not be their jam, right? Let's have folks that are from Black Lives Matter. Let's have folks from immigration justice and all of those other spaces, because I think it's important, and having those kind of strategic dialogues between movements, right, is what's going to help us break down those silos. I have this grand vision that I've been thinking about, initially small in terms of the Veterans Organizing Institute, but having been here now, I think that my vision is expanding. So the idea that I'm trying to put together is something called the Veterans Organizing Summit, right, where we get together veterans from around the country and talk about not only the outside game protest type movement building, but this is a midterm election year. We've got 2020 coming up next year. I'll be damned if this fucker is going to have a second term without a fight. So what are we doing right now to prepare for 2020, right? What are we going to do to shift the balance of power? There are a lot of really encouraging candidates that are running, progressive candidates, people that are outwardly saying, I'm a democratic socialist and I'm running and here's the issues, and I think we can have all of the things that we need for our communities. So that's encouraging. I think that there is kind of this battle over populism right now, and we have to make sure that it lands on our side of things. So I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to the conversation.
right, looks like we have about 25 minutes for an open discussion. And so I think we'll circulate and then we'll come back to the panel towards the end. So it doesn't necessarily have to be question and answer unless there are kind of particular questions you want to direct.
Here's the first hand.
Okay.
This is on? Okay. A couple things that I kind of want to throw into the mix here. The world right now is facing a crisis, and I don't think it's the slightest exaggeration. And in fact, I don't usually like to predict things, but I am fairly certain that within the next year, maybe two, this country will attack Iran or North Korea or both, probably using nuclear weapons. The whole issue of Trump and what's existing right now in this country, I think. Look, in the 60s there was a slogan: if you're not paranoid, you don't know what's going on. And I think if you're not terrified right now, you don't know what's going on. Or you're ignoring what's going on, or you're kind of hoping that what's going on isn't really going on. And I think that hope and that tendency to want things to not be as horrific as they actually are is an extremely dangerous thing, and something that I stay awake at night, every night over. I don't think this is a time, when we can kind of look at things in terms of, well, how do we build things, here, that's going to go there, and it's going to go there. The 2020 elections, I'm not going to say don't get involved in that, but think for a second, what's going to happen in this country if and when the invasion of Iran happens? I mean, you can look back at the invasion of Iraq under, the administration that's now considered to be relatively mild, Bush and Cheney. What's going to happen in this country if and when that happens? Is the Democratic Party, are they going to oppose it? No. It's going to be a time when, telling football players they're going to be fine if they take a knee is going to be mild compared to the kind of repression that's going to come down in this country. And I think we have to be, whatever it means, we have to be on an emergency footing right now. We're not facing a normal situation, and that's a big point for debate and discussion. But I honestly believe we are not facing a normal situation. And I don't know exactly what that means, but I do think that it means that we can't be thinking in terms of, normal ways of creating a movement or being, or all of these kind of things. I just kind of want to throw that in to the mix, because I think that's the situation we face today. I also I just want to add one other thing, and it's just because it's my personal thing. What the fuck is so great about patriotism? I mean, I'm not going to say, don't get involved, but one of the things that became very clear in the course of the Vietnam War, of course, there was a lot of, using patriotic symbols, and it was more a matter of using American history and whatever, tactically or what. But there was a very clear distinction at that time, and I think it's a very real distinction. Nationalism and patriotism in a country like Vietnam was a very, progressive and necessary thing. Patriotism in a country like this, in this superpower that now is fighting militarily in 18 countries around the world, I think you have to really question it. I think you have to more deeply question what is the nature of this society that we're living in that it keeps happening. No matter how much people oppose it, no matter how much people say it shouldn't be this way, it keeps happening. There's something there in the nature of this society and this Constitution, all of that makes that happen. And I think that needs to be questioned in a
Thank
big
you.
way.
We've got about 5 or 6 other questions behind you.
Could I respond to that really quickly?
Sure.
So to be clear, I'm talking about using patriotic symbols. I'm not talking about celebrating patriotism, which even in my book, I talk about the difficulty of using those patriotic symbols, but then it's difficult for veterans to be the one then to question patriot. Once you've held them up and said that they have specific experiences that make them important speakers, then to say, now we want to question patriotism. And that's a real problem for putting Vets for Peace or other organizations like it at the center of an anti-war movement or a peace movement. Because the thing that gave them experiential authority is the thing you want to question. And so sometimes that can be very, very difficult. And I talk about that quite a bit more in the book. I only have a few minutes here, so just to be clear.
Real quick.
That's a great idea. Could people would introduce themselves as they speak? Who's up next?
Jonathan Hutto, Appeal for Redress, Veterans for Peace, and a lot of other organizations. Look, I want to build on the ethos that Jose injected. And the ethos that Jose injected, while he may not have framed it this way, but he was injecting it, was how do we build cadre? How do we build folks who are going to actually wage peace? Because peace is an action. It requires an action. So what I want to inject here, and of course the panel can respond, is from the base that we are in. So I'll give you an anecdote. I told it yesterday at one of the workshops. This book, Soldiers in Revolt, which I just got David to sign, which is tattered now, was sent to me when I was off the coast of Iraq on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt. And it was sent to me by an economics professor at Howard University, Dr. Rodney Green, who was drafted out of Yale University in 1971. And to make a long story very short, the reason why he gave me this book was because I had gone UA from my ship a year prior to deployment, and I had no intentions of going back. And David waged a struggle with me in terms of going back to the ship and waging struggle with my colleagues within the ship, going beyond the choir. So the question I want to put on, when we talk about stopping the next war, John Catalano brought an awesome book here, Turn the Guns Around, the history of the American Service Members Union. From where you are, you're a high school teacher, you're a professor, you're in a union. All of us belong to some base somewhere. I mean, if you don't belong to a base, then you're not having any impact. Wherever your circle is, how are you building cadre to actually wage some struggle? And in this particular piece, how are we building some cadre within the military? How are we actually reaching people who can actually refuse to load a bomb, who can actually have a sit-down strike, or at least a sit-down refusal, or at least just sit down? I think in terms of having that type of discussion, we've got to be able to move to that point. Otherwise, we're going to be participating in what I've termed, not from me personally, but what I believe has become the NGOization of our movements, where it's mostly intellectuals, it's mostly those of us who, in other words, we're not impacting people at the tip of the spear at the point of production. Thank you.
What do we have here? Are you holding a list? Okay.
Yes, I'm Johnny Lewis. I was 68, 69. I was a member and organizer of the American Servicemen's Union. I would like to speak now about including LBGT veterans and active duty personnel. I'm transgender and have been for several years and probably dealt with this my entire life. But I think that I'm not sure there are any, I don't know if there are other gay, if there are other LGBT people here, but I think we need to have a presence at these meetings. I think we need to have an official presence at these meetings. I think we need to be recognized at these meetings as that. Cool. But there are tens of thousands of transgender veterans, at least 50. And many of us, I get medical, I'm transitioning through the VA in Manhattan. There's a VA protocol for that. And that's kind of amazing. That's a victory of the struggle, of our struggle, of veteran struggle. And there are gay veterans and lesbian and bisexual and trans veterans all over the country. But anyway, I just wanted to speak up on that, but I think Michael McPherson raised it. There's the idea of this intersection. And I think that I would not encourage anybody to join the military, but transgender people who are, it's like poor people are seeking ways to even have a job these days or have housing. And if a transgender person wants to go in the military, then they have the right to do that. And also transgender active duty personnel have that right. And we, of course, fight for them. But I think that this idea of patriarchy has, it's alive and well in this room, I think, maybe. And that's not I don't want to, I love and appreciate all the people here, but I think that we really need to, this is an incredible intersectional issue alive in this country right now. And so we, as veterans, as our veterans organizations, and I would really like to participate. And I'm looking at About Face, perhaps in New York, that I might want to be involved in. Mm-hmm. I'm older than, I'm probably twice as old as a lot of the people there. But I like that idea of this intersectionality of drawing all of us into this anti-war peace struggle.
Thank you. Are you keeping an eye on, we have a lot of people now. Just circle that way.
How many questions we have left? So I can assign the numbers.
We have about 15 minutes. So we have about, 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. Uno, dos, tres. I'm gonna.
Actually, I think I can do it without the mic.
I think
if I can just go.
We need it for the
mic. Can I just yell like I like to yell here? Is that all right?
It's for the record. It's for the live streaming.
Okay, then. So what I wanted to do is to pick up on what Jose talked about. When are we going to reconvene? And maybe, David, you already have this in mind for something to address in a moment. But I just wanted to make sure we actually do this. And I actually would propose a specific time for us to reconvene, which would be November 15th, 2019 in New York City, to celebrate that demonstration, November 15th, 1969, and actually to make larger a celebration of the anti-war movement that helped end the Vietnam War. And the thing that's great about this particular date, it has by that point, the GI movement is a key part of the overall anti-war movement. And if you doubt that, you go outside and look at that ad that appeared in the New York Times. Over 1,000 GIs signed an ad supporting that demonstration. I think one of the things we could do with that is have a subcomponent of it that actually, once again, reconvenes a discussion about the GI movement with a conference and panels. I even thought the idea of trying to get a reunion of those 1,000 or 1,500 people who signed that ad, come to New York. Let's celebrate that event, and that's a real possibility. So if that's something we could do, I would certainly advocate it. I'd be happy to work on it. I live in New York City, so if it's something we can do, we should, those of us who would like to see it happen, we should talk with David and perhaps see if we can make that happen.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left and at least 10 people who want to speak. So if you guys would self-discipline yourself to about a minute.
The strategy of being inside and being outside can lead to a real sidetracking of the movement. If you talk about a mass social movement, look at 1968 and what made the real impact in the world. Was it people in the streets or being cleaned for Gene McCarthy? That's fine if people want to go ahead and support peace candidates and be involved in the electoral politics process, but it doesn't give you the depth of activity and the arena of knowledge in order to really combat this system. And that attempt to say, well, if you're really going to be effective, you got to vote, has been a death knell of social movements, I think, since 1964, when they told us, if you don't vote for Goldwater, there's going to be war in Vietnam. And I didn't vote for Goldwater, and there was war in Vietnam.
This is kind of directed at Jose, just a thought, but I think in this room, obviously, like, I guess I'm going to talk about the inside game a little bit, but when we're talking about the political side of things, obviously everyone in this room is obviously probably, I'm speculating, to the left. I think that it's important to remember, too, there is a libertarian movement that we have a natural tactical alliance with on this issue. And I think that they're important to remember sometimes because they can add something to this as well. And so I'd be interested in any thoughts you have on, maybe at another time or whatever, like how to kind of form a tactical alliance on some of these issues and stuff like that.
Pass it forward, I think.
John McAuliffe, I want to makes it a slightly more complicated. As I said the first day, if caring about Vietnam's sovereignty, independence, and freedom is still important by itself, then the issue of the important role of the U.S. military in balancing off China is something that people need to wrap their heads around and figure out how to approach it. The second thing is breaking news, in case you didn't see it yet, that President Trump has withdrawn from the Korea negotiations. No date is set, so the crisis is much sooner. The other crisis, the former head of the DNI, Clapper's new book, explicitly says that Trump is president only because of the Russian intervention. That combining with what is going on now in terms of the Trump people trying to stop the further investigations, I think suggests that we are in the middle of a very large national crisis that whether as veterans or peace movement activists or simply citizens is going to be in our face over the next couple of months inescapably. The final thing is, I may not have been clear last night, but if anyone wants a copy of the video of Don't Burn from Vietnam, I have copies and they're $10.
Yeah, Ron Carver. First I want to say this is the best conference I've ever attended, and in my 72 years I've attended many. And it's mostly to thank David, but really I want to thank everybody who's here, all the people who did workshops, all the others who have attended. This has really been wonderful for me. Secondly, on the question of mobilization versus organizing, as someone who started out with SNCC 54 years ago, that was a SNCC model by young people, and it was, as opposed to the just marching model, people dug into communities and organized and built new leadership structures with new leaders. And third, I spoke with Lisa earlier about other venues for this exhibit, and I want to just throw that out to other folks from other universities. It's something we should all be thinking about. It's possible. It's portable.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's me, yeah. This is not a question. I just got to make a comment. I'm sorry. I want to address David Zeiger's concern. The only thing that's going to match that crisis is the masses of people. And as I said earlier, if people see, and hopefully they will, if something like this happens, they'll get out in the street. But in order for that to be done in an organized way, we have to build relationships. So the same thing that we have to do in the long term, we need to do to make that the most effective thing that it can be. And the second thing is, the reason I brought up about the people not being able to kneel is because people have hijacked the issue of black people being killed by police. But not just black people, people being killed by police. White people can be killed by police. And I kind of am offended by you belittling that and not making the intersectionality of that, because in some ways, that's exactly what the problem is in our communities in terms of trying to organize together and make a difference. It's not about whether or not they can kneel. It's about the issue and taking it away, so that's not even what's being talked about anymore. And if we want people, as I said before, if we want people to believe that there's peace is possible, then we have to show we give a damn about them and that peace is possible in their communities. And for me as a black person, looking at my grandchildren, looking at my son and myself, my daughter, they're pulling out 65-year-old women out of their cars, black women. That's a serious issue. So I just wanted you to know that, because I was like, why did that just didn't make any point. No, yes, you're right. Kneeling, corporations, it won't be a big deal if there's a nuclear explosion, right? But until that happens, it is a big deal in my life. So that I just need to say that.
We have about 6 or 7 people who'd like to speak still, so.
I just wanted to thank you guys for bringing up this idea of reclaiming patriotism. So as a non-military, non-Vietnam generation person, in explaining my research, of which this redefinition of patriotism through GI activism is quite a central point. When I describe my research, a lot of people get really, soldiers can't protest. What subversive thing are you trying to achieve? And especially with the increasing gap between civilian and the military, they don't have this experience with interacting with the military, but what they do have is this really somewhat obnoxious, ingrained patriotic education through the US. So I found that in explaining that patriotic rhetoric that I talk about and these issues around what is patriotism and what is American citizenship, the wheels at least start turning. The hamster hops on the wheel, and even if you don't change any minds, I think you have to meet someone where they're coming from. And for most civilian, non-military people, that's an inroad that I think you can start a conversation beyond activist circles. So I just wanted to thank you guys for bringing that up.
Thanks.
John Catalanato. I just wanted to react by also to what David brought up, but especially what I was speculating this morning with some of the other participants as to sort of why we are so friendly with each other now when we might have been fighting about political issues 40, 50, 30 years ago. And I thought it was because, well, we all lasted, and we kept on fighting, and we kept on fighting in our own ways. And but my reaction to David's Zeiger's expression of concern, almost fear for the issue, is something like I said on a recent speaking tour, not exactly a tour, but engagements I had in Europe, when people asked me, did I think the Trump administration meant a new nuclear war or this or that and another? Are you afraid of that? And I said, I was afraid in '62 when they had the missile crisis, and I was afraid in 1983 when the plane got shot down over Korea. And not that the world couldn't have ended, but my being afraid of it didn't help anything beyond the initial impulse to go out and do something about it. And all of us have done that, and I'm sorry to say that we're going to have to keep on doing it, even those of us who are approaching 80 or more. We can't relax now. We have to keep on fighting. And I think we get a lot from this conference, and that there are special things that the people here can contribute in the struggle against imperialist war. Thank you.
My name's Jerry Casey, and I wanted to just remind us about labor against the war, in part because, first of all, this was pretty heroic because the labor movement up until recently was very patriotic, very nationalistic. Every labor meeting in a local place starts with a Pledge of Allegiance and the flag. And labor against the war started right as soon as the towers came down, and really up against a lot of pushback. We have it's the largest mass organization that's involved in progressive movements, including the Poor People's Campaign right now. And Richard Trump is an amazing leader of the AFL-CIO in that he is embracing these issues as well as the fight against racism. And how many veterans who are in right-wing or have no politics are working, especially as advanced manufacturing comes back. And I'll tell you just one story from someone who's in a red state for a long time. I'm a recent migrant from New York City. But when Paul got here in 2002, he started talking against the war. And the AFL-CIO, Central Labor Council, was for the war. They were patriots, they were nationalists. And the head of the AFL-CIO, a Teamster guy, old school, listened. And Paul didn't even know if anybody was listening. He's just one of you, the stubborns who keep coming and keep doing, and you don't know what's going to be the impact. Within a year, that president of the old school AFL-CIO Central Labor Council was against the war for the idea of bringing the military monies and resources back to the United States to be able to solve people's problems. And this is in red state Indiana. We gave you pence. And if that can happen, it can happen. And we go to a meeting of the AFL-CIO down in Evansville, retirees, they're fighting for their benefits because the mine corporation doesn't want to pay them. They switch companies so the new company doesn't owe them their health care benefits. The first thing they do is they say, how many of you in this room, huge, are veterans? And they all stood up. So this is a constituency that whether we're in the church movement or the women's movement or LGBT, reach out to our trade unions, and that's where you're going to find a lot of working class people. The only other point I wanted to mention is the particular emphasis on outreach by the military to the Latino communities. A great resource that hasn't been mentioned here is called Soy el Army, I'm the Army, and it has incredible, it's a PBS published it, it's a short one, you can do it in a meeting real quick if you have an educational meeting. It talks about the explicit intentionality of the military to go to Latino communities because they've done studies using ethnographers like ourselves that this is a community where they are patriarchal, they know how to follow rules, the father says something, it's crazy nonsense, racist stuff, but it is so explicit, and they particularly take these shows like carnivals to Latino high schools and junior high schools to get the kids to sign up. And I think we should look at that particular issue. The other one that impacts the Latino community is this situation of encouraging kids to volunteer in order to get citizenship. Do you know that one? And so unfortunately, my students in New York City were being pressured by their family members to join the military for the sake of the family. So here's how, if we fight for immigrant rights, we're also going to be fighting against militarism. And also, I just want to say, we already had that 5 minutes to midnight bullshit with Helen Caldecott in the peace movement. It didn't do anything but scare people. We are always on the verge of crisis, and people were on the verge of crisis during Nazism. They had to stand up and do what they could, right? So I think I have learned a lot of things from young and old people here that I hope I'm in a red state now, and so my job is to woman up, and find a way. And if he could do it, and he's middle class, he's not working class, he found a way to talk to these people, and if he can do it coming from New York City in Indiana, I'm telling you, it really did make a change. Oh, guess what? We no longer say the Pledge of Allegiance before every labor meeting. I think that's a step forward, okay? And if we can do it in red state Indiana, we can do it elsewhere.
Okay, I'm going to now, we need to wrap it up, so I'm going to pass it back to Lisa and Jose for like 2 minutes each. What? Oh, we have...
No, just very quickly, I wanted to thank both Lisa and Jose and this morning's panel. I think what they did was show us the bridges that we needed to cross to build a mass movement on the ground that would forestall the empire. And I know David seems to be somewhat pessimistic, but I think that what you guys told us this morning, they were excellent presentations, particularly for us graybeards, to better understand how, we don't have to be so pessimistic because you guys are doing wonderful work and you're also helping to show us the way, particularly showing us the bridges that we can cross and the alliances that we can make and the dots we have to connect. And I think that's what both panels this morning did really effectively.
All right, Lisa, Jose?
Sure.
And then David.
I guess since I spoke first, I'll go again. I want to thank David and Lisa and all the whole team here for bringing us all together. It's been several years since I've been looking at these organizations and this movement. I'm chair of a peace studies department now, so I work on other issues of social justice. Homelessness, Black Lives Matter, and a handful of other issues have really taken up more of my time than anything else. And, getting to train as an academic these days, getting to train students in issues of social justice for all types of activism is what I do. And I'm really thankful for that job. And I have to say that for the graybeards, that you shouldn't be afraid of the next generation coming, because I do have to say there's a lot going on. It's hard to focus them sometimes, don't get me wrong, but I do think, as David Meyer pointed out this morning, we've just got extraordinary activism that's happening all over the place. And I do think that the left has to work on how we build a coalition and not just tear each other down all the time. And thanks, I appreciate that. But this is really hard. I think we are trained to be critical, and being critical is great, but we also have to build each other up, and we have to work together and find ways to work together. And that's really hard. Reaching beyond the choir is one of the hardest things we do, when I am deeply critical of so many things that I didn't even remotely touch on here today, because sometimes they can just be distractions in terms of getting to the heart of the issues and getting things done. And I have to say that, if we can find ways to work together, I think we're going to be stronger than when we're pulled apart. So.
Thank you.
Cool. Somehow that squish in. Yep. So let's see. There's a lot there. I think the first thing is that when I looked at the program, it was clear that David and his team were very intentional about trying to be inclusive, and I think I want to applaud that. And I want to say that this is the standard, and let's do even better next time. And that's important, because honestly, a lot of vet spaces and a lot of peace and justice spaces are still wrestling with that question. And it's just our image as a peace movement is stuck in the minds of a lot of people, right? It's like hippie, tie-dye sort of, there's just like an archetype of a peace activist, right, that maybe isn't working right in terms of how to reach folks. And not to like put anybody down, but it's just that's the reality. And even as a vet, a younger vet, the first time I went to an anti-war thing, I was like, is this the right place for me? Because I'm a conscientious objector, but I don't know if I'm down with these folks, right? The people that were in the room. So it took some work even for me to feel comfortable in those spaces. The question of like tactical alliance with libertarians, I think that some of that's already happening. I know for sure that with Win Without War, they have folks that are libertarian that have a position on war issues. There's a lot of other stuff about libertarians that I can't get down with, but I think the idea that they want to rein in the federal government, particularly around the issue of foreign policy, let's use that to our advantage while not losing sight of our values, right? And have a line that we hold. And then, David, I feel your urgency around this, and I think when I was listening to you say what you were saying, it reminded me about the importance of an internationalist perspective, right? We have folks here from Vietnam. Next time, let's have folks from Iraq and Afghanistan and all the other places that we have troops at the conference, because I think that is hugely important. And that there's, if we think it's hard to organize in this country, think about what it's like to organize unions in Iraq, or, have any kind of, civil society in Afghanistan, right? So I think that's important. It definitely keeps me up at night, the nuclear threat, with Iran, and just to have this idiot in office with the nuclear codes is definitely terrifying. So I feel that sense of urgency. And I think, what you have done, I just want to say, like, personally, you creating Sir No Sir as something to look back on. I don't, maybe you understand how important it was, but I just want to say verbally that was like a blueprint for us to look at that, to read, watching Sir No Sir, reading Soldiers in Revolt, like those two things go so well together, right? And to just it just blew my mind as an active duty person who was kind of like, should I write a blog? That was my political consciousness. And then to understand that Susan Snall was doing leaflet drops over military bases, I'm like, okay, there's a way more room here to resist, right? There's a spectrum of resistance, and I need to figure out where I fall on that spectrum of resistance. So thank you for that piece and the follow-up piece you did with Iraq Vets Against the War. This is where we take our stand. I think that we trusted you to tell our story because you did such a good job with Sir No Sir. So thank you for that. On the question of patriotism, to me, the root of patriotism is love of country, and I love the people of this country, maybe not so much the government at times, right? And certainly not the fucking corporations. So, but I do love the people of this country. I think that there are some values and ideals that I do hold true, and I think are worth fighting for, right? So when I think of patriotism and sort of reclaiming that, it's not their version of patriotism, right? It's a inclusive populist version of patriotism, one that we sort of pull back and make sure that this government actually works in the interest of the people. So that's what patriotism means to me, and I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. So now I will turn it over to David to close us down.
Yeah, I'm not going to close you down. We're going to keep on going. You heard it, right? We're going to keep on going.
Open us up.
Yes. It's not going to be the last, and I look forward to passing the baton on to all of you, and to especially our team here. This has been such an incredible and wonderful experience. I mean, we've been at this now 2.5 days. We stretched this over 3 days. We're always tired in the evenings. We're going till 10 p.m. at night. But I feel like we ought to keep on going here. But, we have to get on to our other jobs and things. But we'll carry this forward. And I hope we can carry this as a community. And we'll maintain it virtually for a while, and then we'll regather. And it's been so beautiful to have all of you here. Someone used the phrase, who's in this room? Who's in the house? We have a cross-section of all of us who have been involved in this military peace movement, as Lisa called it. That's what we are, and a very significant one that can have significant impact. And so it's just been a privilege to be with you. And there's been so much insight and knowledge and wisdom shared, and all of these workshops. I was in and out some of them, and so much commitment and passion to our cause. It's been absolutely beautiful. We have our differences, and naturally, as John said, we fought like cats and dogs or worse back in the day, and we still have differences, and that's important. We have legitimate political perspectives that we need to understand, and hopefully through that we'll come to see some unity and some commonality. And certainly the factors that unite us are much greater and far more important than the political differences that we have. And we have to keep focusing on that and try to build that continued broadening of this community as we go forward. I like the phrase that we're the stubborns. We are stubborn. We're not going to give in. And that's what motivated so many of us, right? I'm not going to accept their repression of my right to speak out. I'm not going to accept being part of this war that I know is unjust. And that means we're persistent. David Meyer said this very well. All movements take a long time. It's the long-distance runners who eventually win the day. In my Gandhi and Beyond book, I say, well, we don't have to run all the time. We can walk, like Gandhi, to the sea, but let's keep at it, and don't give up. And we've learned that lesson. We've got the gray hair to show it. And the younger generation here, I know you're committed as well. So we'll keep on keeping on. I want to do two things here to close up. First is to just talk about where we go from here, some of the follow-up. Several of you have asked about sharing the list of names and emails, and so it's our intention to do that. If you don't want your name shared, come and let us know, let Lisa or me know. But in a week or so, we'll put a list together and share it with everyone, so you can help to be in touch. As you know, we've been recording all the sessions. We have video of the plenary sessions here, and we have audio of all of the workshops. So we'll get that edited here in the coming weeks. Give us some time, but we'll let you know, and we'll have it on the website somewhere so that everyone can access it, and we can learn from it. I really want to listen again to a number of these workshops, presentations this morning, among others, and really get more of the insight and richness that was in so many of the sessions that we were part of here. So we'll keep that, and we'll notify you about that. And especially the workshop chairs, as you were in the discussions, I see that many of you were taking notes. Share those with us, in terms of ideas that came out of the workshop specifically that maybe we don't all have a chance to hear. And let's put those on the table as well, virtually, and we'll share those so that we can continue forward with the research agenda. A lot of really important things we identified that we need to study further, more data we have to put out, but then also the action agenda, some of the things we've been talking about here today. We will have we have some papers that have been submitted for publication, and not all of you have submitted papers. Those who want to will entertain submissions. The hard deadline will be August 20 for final submissions. So those of you who've done first drafts, that's your revision deadline. And we'll be talking to publishers. There's no guarantees in this stuff, but we hopefully will find a publisher that we can put together a volume. And we'll have some sort of presence on our website. We'll have to talk about it among ourselves here at the Kroc Institute with some of the papers and, as I mentioned, the audio and video records as well. As Ron said, we have this magnificent exhibit that Ron put together especially. Let's give Ron another applause for that. I have to tell you, when we first saw it in Saigon, I've been helping Ron on this, and a number of us have been helping him. And when we were there at the War Remnants Museum, and I went the day before to just see if I could help to get the final setup. And Ron was there in the middle of the room in his element, and all the tourists and international folks are coming in, and he's explaining what it is and showing the different images. And so I walked around and just looked at the whole exhibit. It took about 30 minutes, 40 minutes to do that. And I was just so overwhelmed. I came up to him, gave him a great big bear hug, and I had tears in my eyes because it so much encapsulates all that we've done over the years. I wrote this 250-page book, and he put it together in an exhibit in a beautiful way, just as David did with the film. So it's a great addition to our work, and we want to take it on the road. And we're going to try to pull together a process for doing that. As Ron said, we need your help. It's a big undertaking, and my Kroc team can verify that. It's already built now, so that part's done. And it's going to be in a crate that'll be easily portable. But it takes some commitment on the part of your institution, wherever you are, to put it up and then to keep and get publicity out, and hopefully organize some kind of a seminar or an event in association with the opening of the display. But we think this could be a really important part of our education to go with the films, the books, and so many other things that we have now. So if you're interested, please contact Ron or me. Ron and I have worked together on this. We've kind of enlisted and Susan Schnall to be one of our key partners on this, but others have been helping as well. And we'll try to make sure that we can get it out on the road again. So those are some of the kind of specific items for follow-up. And lastly, I just want to say how much I am grateful to all of you for your commitment. It's been, for me as well, I think really the greatest conference I've ever been to, and there's been a whole lot of them over the years, like all of you. And that's because we have worked together as a team. This has been an inclusive process. We did consciously try to include as many different parts of the movement, and young and old, across as many different dimensions as possible. And I'm so grateful to the Kroc Institute and university here for hosting this, for accepting my kind of crazy idea several months ago, a year ago almost, that we would have this big conference about military peace movements and veterans and GIs who spoke out against war. But I've had nothing but positive support from Dean Appleby, who we heard from yesterday, and from Professor Kaufman, Asher Kaufman, our director. So that's been really great and gratifying for me, and also I think an indication of and a validation of our legitimacy as a movement. And we're being more and more recognized as a necessary and important part of the anti-war movement broadly, but of how we understand peace. As I said the first day, the construction of peace requires people from the military to be at a central role in that effort. And we can be part of that, we are part of that, and we can build it for the future. And lastly, to really pay tribute to my staff colleagues who've been so tremendously helpful on this, and they're thankfully came by, and also Ellie's here. But first, Laurel Stone, who's the manager of our Policy Studies program. Lisa Gingrich, who you've all gotten to know very well through the many communications. A really high-class, first-class events organizer. Ellie Berriocas-Reed, who's been terrific. Grace Garvey, our student assistant. Yeah, really terrific. And our communications staff, Hannah Heitzinger and Christy Flaherty, have done all the materials to promote this, and the website. Tremendous work. And our volunteer team from my family, James Cortright, our audio tech. His partner, Ashley Eschbach. Ashley, thank you. And my wife and partner of life, Karen Jacob, who helped us with the exhibit and everything. And I'd like to here at the end also make a special presentation and thank you to our wonderful colleagues from Vietnam, Madam Ninh, Ms. Tao. We wanted to present one of the posters from the exhibit. So it's the Avedon poster, and we want one for each of you. And we know it's part of the exhibit, and we hope you can take it back and have. Oh yeah, sure.
Get out of the shot.
We'll crop it later.
Yeah, exactly. I hope so. Not so sure about my hair today. I'm just kidding.
About your hair?
Yeah, my hair. I was teasing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so definitely crop me out of that shot, please. I feel a lot grayer.
So thank you all. Safe journey home.
Do you want to explain to them?
Well, they know. Yeah, it's Avedon. It's the thinking soldier. I mean, I was the person who posed for it, but it's about the thinking soldier. Yeah. Back in the day when I had more hair and. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all.
I'm still working on it.
Thank you.